Barack Obama doesn't weigh in on current events very often anymore. But this week he did, and he didn't hold back. He took direct aim at Donald Trump's new agreement with Iran, and the comparison to Obama's own nuclear deal, the JCPOA, is not flattering for Trump. For almost 2 decades, Trump has built part of his political identity on trashing that Iran deal, mocking it, calling it weak, calling Obama naive for signing it. And now, in 2026, Trump has gone and negotiated his own version of it, except by most honest ratings, it's a weaker deal that hands Iran more money and leaves the United States with less leverage, not more. I want to walk you through this whole story. What Obama actually said this week, what he predicted years ago when Trump tore up the original deal, and how Trump's own team is trying to spin a worse outcome as a victory. Let's get into it. Here's where we are. To be fair and clear about my own position first, I'm glad there's a deal at all, and I'm relieved if it means the United States can step back from this conflict. But I want to say plainly, nothing Trump says can be taken purely at face value, so we'll have to watch what actually happens rather than what gets announced. And here's the bigger point that needs to be said clearly. The United States never should have gotten dragged into this war alongside Netanyahu in the first place. That's the original sin here. Trump spent months insisting he would only accept Iran's total surrender. In the end, by the terms being reported, it looks much closer to the reverse, a deal that gives Iran significant concessions. There's a lesson buried in that. It's easy to stand on the sidelines and rip apart someone else's diplomacy. It's a lot harder to actually sit at the table, juggle competing interests, allies, adversaries, domestic politics, military risk, and land on something workable. Trump spent 15 years mocking Obama for doing exactly that. Now he's the one in the chair. So let's break down what's actually in this new arrangement, and then I'll show you just how badly this lines up with everything Trump used to say. According to reporting making the rounds this week, the framework involves a signing event in Geneva, reportedly bringing together Iranian parliamentary leadership, including a former senior military figure, alongside Vice President J.D. Vance. The financial terms being reported are striking. Tens of billions of dollars released to Iran in installments, reportedly in the range of $24 billion, with talk of further regional development funding that could run into the hundreds of billions over time. On the nuclear side, Trump has publicly claimed the deal removes Iran's nuclear material entirely. But that's not actually what he told reporters. In comments to a major newspaper, Trump described a deal where Iran is still allowed to enrich uranium at low levels. He characterized it as enrichment capped below weapons usable thresholds. Here's the problem. That's essentially the same enrichment allowance that existed under Obama's original JCPOA. The real difference is what backed it up. The JCPOA was paired with an intensive, multilateral inspection and verification system. What's being described now relies far more heavily on taking Iran's word for it. Now let's go back and hear it from the man who actually negotiated the original deal. Obama sat down with ABC this week, and his message was measured but pointed. Paraphrasing the substance of what he said, he doubted that whatever emerges from this new framework will meaningfully improve on the deal that already existed and had been functioning for years before the U.S. pulled out of it. He said he was simply relieved if the bombing has stopped and ordinary Iranians and others caught in the conflict are no longer suffering because of the war. Then he made a broader point, one aimed squarely at the entire premise of this conflict. He said that in hindsight, this whole episode is a reminder that complicated foreign policy problems don't get solved by bombing or bullying your way through them. He said that approach can look appealing in the moment, but the harder, more responsible path is sticking with diplomacy, even when it only gets you 80 or 90% of what you want, because that's usually still better than the alternative of war. He said, essentially, that this is a lesson the U.S. seems to need to relearn again and again. That's measured. That's careful. And given what's happened since 2018, it's hard to argue he's wrong. There's also a smaller, more symbolic moment worth mentioning. Obama showed up at a sporting event recently and the crowd reaction was warm, cheering, a clearly positive response. Contrast that with footage from Trump's appearance at a Knicks playoff game this season, where the reaction from the arena crowd was considerably colder, with audible booing reported by multiple outlets. Make of that what you will. Now let's go back to 2018 because this is where the real receipts are. When Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA back in May of 2018, Obama released a lengthy written statement. Rating it again now, in 2026, it holds up as remarkably prescient. I'm gonna walk through the substance of what he said, point by point, in my own words, because honestly, looking back, he called almost all of this. He opened by framing the stakes. Few things matter more to U.S. and global security than stopping the spread of nuclear weapons and avoiding a more destructive war in the Middle East. That, he said, is exactly why the original nuclear agreement with Iran had been negotiated in the first place. He argued the deal was working, and not just in his own assessment. He pointed out that U.S. allies in Europe, independent nuclear experts, and even the sitting Secretary of Defense at the time, James Mattis, shared that view. He called the agreement a model of what diplomacy can achieve, and said its inspection regime was exactly the kind of framework the U.S. should be trying to replicate with North Korea. He raised North Korea specifically, warning that walking away from a working non-proliferation deal with Iran could undercut U.S. credibility in the very same kind of deal with Pyongyang. That's worth pausing on, because we now know what happened next. Trump's diplomacy with Kim Jong-un didn't stop North Korea's program. Within Trump's own term, North Korea continued advancing its nuclear capability. Withdrawing from the Iran deal sent a message to other states. Don't bother committing to these agreements, because the U.S. might tear them up anyway. That is arguably part of the lesson North Korea took from watching the JCPOA get torn apart. Obama then went through the facts of the original deal in detail. He noted it was never just a U.S.-Iran arrangement, it was the product of years of coalition building, involving the UK, France, Germany, the EU, Russia, and China alongside Iran, and it had been unanimously endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. He laid out what the deal had actually accomplished. Iran had dismantled the core of a reactor capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium, removed roughly 2/3 of its centrifuges, more than 13,000 of them, placed what remained under international monitoring, and eliminated the vast majority, around 97%, of its enriched uranium stockpile. He stressed the deal didn't rely on trust. It relied on what he called the most rigorous inspections and verification regime ever built into an arms control agreement, giving international monitors visibility into Iran's entire nuclear supply chain specifically so cheating could be caught. He pointed out that U.S. intelligence agencies, U.S. allies, and the International Atomic Energy Agency had all independently confirmed Iran was complying with its obligations under the deal. He clarified that the deal's core prohibition, Iran never obtaining a nuclear weapon, was permanent, and that its most significant inspection provisions didn't expire for 15 to 25 years, meaning there was no urgent reason to blow it up at that moment. And he was clear-eyed that the deal was never meant to fix every problem with Iran, its support for proxy groups, its threats toward Israel and its neighbors, all of that remained real. But he argued that's precisely the point. Every one of those problems becomes far more dangerous if paired with an unconstrained nuclear program. Keeping the lid on the nuclear issue made it easier, not harder, to confront everything else. He closed with a warning that reads almost eerily accurate today. That walking away from the deal without any Iranian violation risked leaving the U.S. eventually stuck choosing between a nuclear-armed Iran or another war in the Middle East to prevent one. That's where we are right now. That's not hindsight bias. He wrote that down on the record in 2018. Now go back further to 2011, years before any of this, and listen to how Trump used to talk about Iran when he was just a media figure, not yet in office. In one clip from that period, Trump accused then-President Obama of being too weak to negotiate and warned that Obama might start a war with Iran simply to boost his own re-election chances, calling himself more militant by comparison. In a separate 2011 appearance, Trump talked about Iran the way he talked about Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, describing them all as leaders who had overplayed their hand, and suggesting Iran would face the same fate unless they negotiated. When pressed on what the U.S. could actually offer Iran to get them to give up nuclear ambitions, his answer was blunt. Survival. Their continued existence as a regime, full stop. He doubled down by predicting Obama would eventually go to war with Iran for political advantage. So that's Trump in 2011. Convinced Obama was too weak, convinced war was coming, framing the entire relationship as a threat of survival. Now fast forward to this year. In an April 2026 appearance, while the war with Iran was actively underway, Trump bragged about his decision to scrap the original nuclear deal. He argued that if he hadn't pulled the U.S. out of the agreement Obama negotiated, the broader regional situation, including Israel's position, would look completely different, and he claimed Iran would already have a nuclear weapon by now. He tied that decision to the killing of Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani and credited himself with terminating what he called the Iran nuclear deal that was given to us by the Obama administration, to applause from the crowd. So just sit with the timeline. Trump spends a decade and a half saying Obama is weak and a deal will lead to war. Trump tears up the actual deal in 2018. War eventually happens in 2025 and 2026. Trump now claims credit for preventing the very outcome his own withdrawal helped set in motion. The day after this new framework was announced, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went on morning television to explain why this deal is supposedly so much better than Obama's. It's worth walking through what he actually said, because the reasoning doesn't hold together well. Asked how quickly the U.S. blockade on Iranian oil exports would lift, Hegseth said the expectation was immediate, that as soon as Iran signs, the blockade ends the next day. When pressed on the performance-based language, he argued this approach is smarter than Obama's because Trump won't simply give concessions away for free. Instead, the blockade would lift in step with the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a process he estimated could take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to fully play out. He then drew his central contrast. He claimed that under Obama, the U.S. essentially pleaded with Iran for a deal, whereas under Trump, the U.S. bombed Iran first, imposed a blockade, and is now using the threat of resuming military action as leverage to keep Iran at the table over a 60-day negotiating window. He said the agreement specifies Iran will never seek, buy, or possess a nuclear weapon, with details to be finalized through further negotiation. He argued that Iran is more devastated militarily right now than at any point in its history as an Islamic republic, and that's why they're negotiating at all. His framing, Trump negotiated from a position of strength because he used military force first, and that leveraged the ability to snap back the blockade.